Assalamu alaikum, welcome back to another video. My name is Naveed Husain and I am a divorce attorney in Chicago. Today I wanted to talk about in-laws and how in-laws are the biggest reason, or you can even argue the number one reason for divorce in the Muslim community, especially amongst my clients. My clients are primarily Muslim and primarily from the South Asian community, right? So you have Indians, Pakistanis, quote unquote Desis. And it's very interesting because I think for non-Desi individuals or non-Muslims or, the vast majority or the, outside community, this might be very shocking. You might think, well, what about cheating? What about abuse? What about these other things? How could it be that in-laws is one of the biggest reasons for divorce? And I do think that this is definitely a Eastern phenomenon, right? You're not going to see this in Western cultures. People argue that this came from, agricultural societies, for example, where you had this land and it was kind of inherited for generations and generations, and it made sense to have the men stay, bring their wives, bring their kids, and everybody works this land. And also, I think back home, it made more sense, right? In India and Pakistan, where you live in multi-generational homes, you have big families, you have land that was inherited, and basically each person might have their own quarters, they might have their own kitchen, their own living area, and there's just a big open courtyard in the middle. And also you would have a lot of help, right? Maids and nannies and things like that. And so there wasn't that much pressure, let's say, on the individual couple, or on the individual in-law or the spouse or the husband or whoever it might be. The other thing, and I've talked about this before, is our parents come from a very communal society, right? It's a over-rotation, actually. Just as much as I dog on the West for being overly individualistic, you can argue that our parents, the societies that they came from, was too communal, right? They care too much about their reputation. They care too much about their family, about how people will view them. And so these two ideas are really clashing in our generation, right? We really see right now in this time span, I think in the last 10 years, and I think it's going to last another 10 years or so, where you see this clashing of individualism or, in communalism, or the East and the West. And our mother-in-laws and our daughter-in-laws are a very big part of that, okay? And so there's a lot of problems, right? Because from the mother-in-law's perspective, the mother-in-law in our community especially has so many expectations of their daughter-in-law and of their son, right? For example, there is an expectation that the son should live in the house, that the daughter should move in, and now the daughter for some reason becomes like the maid of the house. They're like the nokrani, right? And now they're supposed to serve everybody. They're supposed to, make roti and chai and this and that. But at the same time, the mother-in-laws want their daughter-in-laws to be doctors and, lawyers and whatever else. It makes absolutely no sense. So there's so much expectation. Even if you don't end up living at your mother-in-law's, or you don't live with your parents, the mother-in-law is almost going to keep you a step below because you took their son away from them. The expectation has been broken. And so you almost start from, -1. But also from the daughter-in-law's perspective, right? There's a lot of problems as well because there's this preconceived antagonism with the mother-in-law where everything becomes a attack, right? Everything is a comment. Everything seems to be an attack, whereas the husband is thinking like, what are you talking about? I know my mother. I know that's not what she's thinking, right? And so it really goes to both sides, right? The mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law. So a few days ago, I posted a question on my Instagram and I asked people to share their crazy mother-in-law stories. Okay, are there crazy in-law stories? And really what I saw mostly was obviously daughter-in-laws talking about the treatment of their mother-in-law. And I mean, there were some crazy things. I didn't even share most of them. But for example, the mother-in-law telling the daughter-in-law that, my son would enjoy this particular lingerie, or turning off the water so that the couple couldn't make ghusl in the morning after having relations. Basically getting involved in the day-to-day. And horrendous stories that, if you really thought about it, are, non-Desis, non-Muslims be like, what the heck are you talking about? But it's happening. I mean, I personally have cases where, father-in-laws are abusing their daughter-in-laws, where you have like punching and kicking and locking the daughter-in-law in rooms and, crazy, crazy things. But one thing I realized is that, yes, daughter-in-law and the mother-in-law is really the relationship that we concentrate on. But I also see a lot of problems between son-in-laws and their in-laws, right? You see son-in-laws being emasculated, being disrespected, right? And this really has an impact on the relationship. Okay, so you can see that the marriage is being attacked and is being surrounded by these in-laws that have a very big impact on this couple. Okay, and you can see how this pressure can lead to divorce. You can see how people would go crazy. Not only do you have to deal with the one-on-one relationship with your spouse, but now you have to deal with all these other actors who are now part of this. The other problem that I see are what it leads into, not only divorce, right? Yes, the couple, unfortunately, God forbid, breaks up, but now the litigation, the process itself is now being fueled by the in-laws, right? And they're making the litigation even worse. Usually in consultations, it's funny because the Muslims, the Desis, they're the ones who will bring their whole khandan to the consultation. And everybody has a say, everybody's riled up, everybody wants to get revenge. And you can see how this little thing, issue between husband and wife now becomes this whole global warfare, right? And so I wanted to end with a few tips, a few points to see or to help or to advise our community on how to deal with this in-law relationship, right? Number one is don't live with your in-laws. Don't have your wife live with your mother, right? That's the rule. Obviously, there's going to be exceptions to the rule. If your father's not around, you have to financially provide. I get it, right? But the rule should be don't have your wife live with your mother. And if you do, if that happens, right? And I understand it happens and it's all over, of course, we can't control it, but you have to overcompensate. You have to overcompensate for the arrangement of your wife because theoretically, right, you as the man are supposed to provide for your wife and for your mother, okay? And if there's a deficiency in that and your wife is putting up with it, you have to overcompensate. There has to be more gifts. There has to be more time. There has to be more assurances. There have to be, more expression of the love languages that your wife wants to receive, right? And to this point, I would also talk to the sisters, right? And tell the sisters to have an understanding that it is the man's responsibility, the son's responsibility to support their mother, especially if father is not around. And understand that it might be better to have two separate apartments than have one big house. So it's a lifestyle adjustment, right? I think that it's better to have the lower, life standard versus living in one home. Okay, that's point number one. Point number two is also addressing the guys. And what I would say is that us guys need to learn how to be more assertive. Okay, and this is something that I want to work on outside of the legal world, right? Like when I'm in court, when I'm being a lawyer, when I'm talking to other people, yes, you have that assertiveness, but sometimes with your family, you're just so used to being passive. And here's the thing, assertiveness does not mean to be mean. It doesn't mean to be disrespectful. Assertiveness is to draw boundaries so that things don't lead to bigger things, right? And that's a very interesting balance that we have to play. And I think a lot of this mother-in-law, daughter-in-law issue is a mismanagement by the husband in certain circumstances, right? That if you are a mama's boy and you are unable to say anything to your mother, or you're unable to say anything to your wife, right? There should be boundaries that you establish with your mother. This is how things should be treated. This is, our time. This is our place. Obviously in a very, respectful manner. And the same thing to the wife, right? You can't have your wife saying bad things about your mother in front of you. You have to draw boundaries, okay? And you have to become assertive. Number three is to the girls, or to the women, to the wives, okay? Don't complain to your family about your husband. And I know, I don't know if this is mind-boggling or, shattering or whatever, but this is a very big deal for men. Very, very big deal. If you go and you complain to your parents about your husband, the little things, the day-to-day things, right? Of course, I'm not talking about, something big and you have to go and get their counsel. I'm talking about the day-to-day complaining that happens, is that you will go and you'll give your frustrations to your parents or to your sister or to whoever else. You're going to forget about it the next day. But I promise that your mother, your sister, is going to hold that perception of your husband, and their treatment is going to change towards them, okay? What men want more than anything else is to be respected. As soon as they can feel that respect is going away, that relationship is going to start to suffer. And then you ask your husband, like, why don't you want to come to my family? Why don't you want to be involved? Well, if everybody has this negative impression, why would you want to go? Right? And so I think to the sisters, it's our job to bolster that respect of our husbands in front of our family. Show them that he's doing, your husband's doing a great job providing or raising the children or working out or hustling or studying or whatever they're doing. Like, bolster their reputation in front of, not diminish their reputation in front of your family. Okay? The other thing I want to say is to parents. We as parents can change the tide. Right? We can make sure that our kids are prepared to manage a relationship. And once we do marry them off, we have to be confident that we don't have to be involved anymore. Let them manage that relationship. Encourage our kids to live away. Okay? If you can afford it, maybe rent an apartment for your children. We talk a lot about paying for our children's school. Right? But I'm starting to think of a different mentality. Instead of making sure that my kids' education is paid off, and of course, that's going to be one of my goals, but I think a better and more primary goal living in America is to have a house, is to buy a house for your child rather than, our primary and prior to paying for their education, because that house is what's so limited in America, right? So limited in our areas. And that's the basis of starting a family, right? If you have a home, you have a house to live that's being paid for or acquired or whatever, I think that's a better gift. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks. Hit that like button. Subscribe for future videos on topics about divorce, marriage, and whatever else is going on in my mind. I know a lot of you have reached out to talk about divorce or family or kids or whatever it might be. And it's not really legal advice that you're seeking. You don't want to reach out to the law firm. So I did create a link. If you want to talk about divorce or coaching or whatever, questions you might have, non-legal related, I did create a link. You can book a time if you are so inclined. And until next time, inshallah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.